So let me repeat. I'm very happy to be here to see you. The important thing is that I may not be able to give you what you want. In fact, I shan't. I shall not be able to give you what you want. What I will try to do is to make you understand what it is that you want. All I can do is to try to make you understand what it is that you want. And at the end of the talk, I think you'll see the difference. But at the present, just bear that in mind. And I say it now because don't expect anything to happen. The real obstruction is the expectation that you will get what you want. And the wanting is the whole obstruction. That's one. And the second thing is, which again for me is most important, which has relation to what I've already told you. If you are expecting to get something out of it, then your listening will be different to what I want it to be. What I want you to do is this. You have found the time to come here. You have arranged your affairs so that you could come here. And you have paid for the seminar. So, you have done all that you need to do. At this seminar, I don't expect you to do anything. Not even to listen. When I say not even to listen, what I mean is I don't want you to make any effort to listen. Effort to listen means grabbing the words that are coming out. I don't want that to happen. What I want you to do is to relax and let the words come to you. I repeat, what I want you to do is to relax and let the words come to you. One, and let the words do to you what they're supposed to do. Same words, quite frankly, they won't have the same effect on all of you. The words can only have that effect on you which they are supposed to have on you. So, I repeat again, please, don't try to grab the words, let the words come to you. And let the words do whatever they are supposed to do. Just relax and let the words come to you.
Das Wichtigste, Entschuldigung, das Wichtigste für uns ist, und darum bittet er uns, einfach nur zuzuhören. Denn alle Erwartungen stehen im Wege. Wer was erwartet, kriegt nichts. Wer aber einfach schlicht die Worte kommen lässt, bekommt das, was er beabsichtigt und was möglich ist. Am Anfang hat er natürlich begrüßt und that's about it, the gist of it. Wasn't it?
So, the first thing I would like to say is that whatever I say is a concept. Whatever I say is a concept. My definition of a concept is this. A concept is something which some people may believe and some people may not believe. So concept is that which some people may believe, some people may not. on this basis, whatever any sage has said at any time, whether it is Jesus Christ or Prophet Muhammad or Lord Buddha or Ramana Maharshi, whatever any one of them has said is a concept. Whatever any scripture of any religion has said is a concept. A concept, I repeat, is one which some people may believe and some people don't. And that is why we have been having religious wars for 2000 years. Because they are all based on concepts. And yet, every religion tells you the truth, which no one can deny. So what is the truth? Is there a truth which no one can deny? Is there a truth which no one can deny? Someone may come to me and he says, "Look, Ramesh, I have studied the subject for 20 years. I have a doctorate in comparative religions. And I am not trying to make an impression. I am telling you what I feel from my heart. And that is that I cannot believe, not I don't believe, he says, I cannot believe that God exists. He is entitled to it because God is a concept created by the human mind. But I would ask him, God may or may not exist. But do you doubt that you exist? Do you doubt that you are? I am, which no one can deny, is the only truth. I am. I exist. And this I am is not I am John or I am Jane or I am Robert or I am Henning or I am Heine. The John, Jane, Heine and Henning are that which veils or covers or hides the truth, which is the impersonal awareness of existence. I am, which is not a concept because no one can deny it. That is the only truth. The moment we depart from it, it's conceptual. And we go away from the truth. And yet, knowing that, we have to move away from the truth. And we are the John, Jane, Heine and Henning that I mentioned. They belong to life as we know it. So, my basic concept, the very basic concept, you see, let me tell you this. I do have, as I said earlier, a list of concepts. At the end of the seminar, I don't want you to go away with a hazy idea of what Ramesh wanted to say. If somebody asks you after you go from the seminar, what did Ramesh have to say? Your answer should be, what I would like your answer to be is this. Ramesh has several concepts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What Ramesh has is concepts. But at least that I would like you to be sure of. That what the concepts are. Because as I said, whatever any sage has said is a concept. The only thing is what that concept does for you individually. And a concept remains a concept until the basic concept is tried out from personal experience and is found to be true. So only when you try the basic concept from your personal experience and you come to the conclusion that that is so, then for you individually the concept becomes the truth. Otherwise, I have seen people come to me. He said, I said, my usual questions are to get to know the person in order to be able to help the person. My usual questions are, do you consider yourself to be a spiritual seeker? And the answer is, of course, usually yes. So how long? You'll be amazed how many, especially recent years. The answer is, ever since I can remember. Ever since I can remember. That is the answer. You see? So I asked them, at the present moment, then they say, so I said, where have you been? Whom have you seen? What kind of reading have you done? And the amount of reading that has been done and the number of people I've seen is vast. So I said, with all that vast amount of reading that you have done and the people you have met, there must be some understanding. There must be some understanding about what you want. And two, some understanding about how you are going to get it and what you are doing to get it. And again you will be astonished that the one who has been a spiritual seeker ever since he can remember, he or she can remember, does not have an answer. There is no clear understanding about what he or she wants, let alone getting what it is. They are not sure about what they want. That I do not want. So only thing I do not want is confusion. Therefore I say, whatever I say is going to be a concept. But if at the end of the seminar you are able to jot down and say, these are the Ramesh's concepts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I shall be satisfied. And I have a confirmed belief that you will too, whether you get what you want or not. The important thing really is to know what you want. That is the important thing. So, my basic concept number 1, is this. All there is consciousness. What do I mean by consciousness? By consciousness, I mean the source, the one without the second. The source, consciousness, from which the manifestation has arisen, which you can, I would say, Consciousness at rest is the source. Consciousness in movement is the manifestation and its functioning. That is the basic concept. Consciousness at source, consciousness at rest, consciousness in movement. You can have that, call it whatever name you like. So long as this basic understanding of that whatever name you give it is the source, then there's no problem. But very often there are problems because this is forgotten. Many people, the scientists, would like to call it primal or potential energy and activized energy. Consciousness at rest, consciousness in movement. Potential or primal energy and energy activized. Nirvana and samsara, which the words Buddha used. But the basic point which Buddha also made is that the two are not two. Consciousness at rest and consciousness in movement, they are not two. That is the whole basic. All there is the source. What aspect of the source it is, it doesn't matter. Heiner standing, Heiner sitting, Heiner running, or Heiner lying down. There are not four Heiners. So, whether it is consciousness at rest or consciousness in movement, it is the same consciousness. Primal energy, the in potential form or the activized form, is the same energy. Some people may like the word to be used, they would like the word to be God. Although those who like the word God have a different meaning. That I would like to clear up. When I use the word God for the source, by the word God, I mean the source, not an all-powerful entity connected with the manifestation, which is how the word is generally used. When I use the word God, I would like you to please remember that I do not mean by the word God an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-merciful entity connected with manifestation. Then such an entity would be part of the functioning of manifestation. That is not what I mean God when I shall be using the word God. It should always mean, as far as we are concerned, for this seminar, the God represents the same source, whether you call it energy, consciousness, or the source. What is meant is the source, the one without the second. Then there is no confusion. So, what we are really concerned with is consciousness in action. We are really not concerned when we are talking about consciousness. We are not really concerned with consciousness at rest, except to realize and never forget that the two are not two, the two are one. In the words of Lord Buddha, nirvana and samsara, nirvana is samsara and samsara is nirvana. They are not two. But we are really concerned, once that is kept in mind, then we are not really concerned with consciousness at rest. What we are really not concerned with is potential energy. What we are really concerned with is the activized energy or the manifestation in functioning or life as we call it. So whatever we talk about, that is why I call it a concept. Life as we know it, that is what we are concerned with. So, the basic concept is all there is a source or consciousness at rest, which is in movement, or energy which is activized. So what we are really concerned with is the activized energy or life as we know it. Now, life as we know it, the individual comes in, and that is why the individual human being is concerned with what life brings. So, my second concept is this. The individual human being is part of the manifestation. And therefore, basically, the human being cannot be anything other than one species of object which, along with the other thousands of species of objects on land, in water, and in air, together constitute the totality of manifestation. I repeat, my basic concept in the functioning of manifestation, my basic concept in life as we know it, is that the human being is one species of object which, along with the other thousands of species of objects, land, water and air, constitute the totality of objects in manifestation. That is the basic concept. And the human being is a species of object. What is the species of object? According to my concept, the human being is no more than a uniquely programmed object, a uniquely programmed instrument, a uniquely programmed computer through which consciousness or energy or God functions and brings about such actions as are supposed to happen according to what we may conceptually call universal law or divine law, or more simply, God's will. So, using the word God, my basic concept is, in life as we know it, nothing can happen unless it is God's will. That is my basic concept in life, in the functioning of manifestation. Nothing can happen unless it is the will of the source, it is the will of consciousness, or it is the will of God. So, the expansion of the basic concept is this. it is consciousness, or the source, or God, functioning through every human being. That is, consciousness or the source or God functioning through every uniquely programmed instrument or computer and bringing about such actions as are supposed to happen according to God's will. Precisely like electricity functions through all electrical gadgets and produces that which each individual electrical gadget is designed to produce. I repeat, consciousness or the source or God produces through each individual human computer that action which is supposed to be produced through that uniquely programmed human computer. Exactly as electricity produces through every electrical gadget only that which that electrical gadget is designed to produce. The electrical gadget does not complain because in the electrical gadget there is no sentience, there is no ego to complain. But in the human computer, there is the ego which complains, has expectations, because the ego thinks he exists. It is he who produces actions happening through his body. And what enlightenment or self-realization is supposed to be is what the ego wants. So the ego wants enlightenment or self-realization as an object which will give him or her more happiness than anything the world has given him or her. That is the expectation. By enlightenment or self-realization is meant an object that will give the human being more happiness than the world has been able to give him or her. And the ego continues seeking on these lines, goes to various gurus, goes to various ashrams, tries to do whatever he is told to do, and finally finds that he, the ego, he or she, the ego, cannot get what he or she wants. And the seeking for enlightenment or self-realization, which begins as a seeking for an object which will give him happiness, ceases only when the ego comes to the conclusion that the ego cannot get what it wants, that it is naturally impossible for the ego to get enlightenment or self-realization. Because the ego finds from personal experience, I repeat, the ego ultimately finds from personal experience that he or she is not the doer of actions which happen through that body-mind organism. That self-realization or enlightenment can happen only with the realization that the ego really does not exist. And it is the ego himself which has to come to the conclusion that the ego does not exist as the doer. And that the ego can come to the conclusion only, I repeat, only from personal experience. So the question arises, how did the ego come into being? The ego who wants self-realization. And the ego finally comes to the conclusion that he does not exist. The ego does not exist. So how did the ego come into being in the first place? I mean, there is no confusion about that part of it. Every sect, every religion will tell you that the ego, it is the ego which is the cause of your unhappiness. The only problem is that many of them tell you that you must get rid of the ego. Mm-hmm. That is the whole problem. You are the ego. And you are told you must get rid of the ego. You see? That is the whole problem in obstruction. You are told to get rid of the ego. Oh, they help you. They help you. They give you a list of things to do and a list of things not to do. You see? And then you say, look, I did my best, but the things I'm supposed to do, I don't do. And the things which I'm not supposed to do, I can't help doing. What do I do? Work harder. You see? You must work harder. How hard? Oh, they have a simile for that too. You see? You must work hard. As you would, you work hard so that you will want it that much intensely, as much as you would want a gasp of air when you are suffocating. You must work harder. You see? And then you find, after 20, 30 years, that you have, after a lot of effort, been able to do what you are supposed to do, and you have been able not to do the things you are supposed not to do. And yet nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. At the very first, at the second seminar in the States, a place called Joshua Tree in the desert, American desert, California desert. There was a middle-aged woman who came, and I'll never forget that case. She was from New Zealand, and her story was interesting. You see, what she said was this: I had a perfectly wonderful husband, and I had a perfectly wonderful family, 3 children. And something happened You see, that is, something happened. And she gave up his family, she gave up her family and went to an ashram. And the ashram told her, gave her a list of things to be done, list of things not to be done. And she said, I really worked intensely and hard. And I could honestly say that I did everything I was supposed to do. I didn't do one thing I was not supposed to do. And yet nothing happened. So she said, after 3 or 4 years of frustration, someone mentioned to her some other ashram. So she went to this another ashram. And she said the same thing happened. List of things to be done, list of things not to be done. And after 3 or 4 years at each place, she nearly lost her mind. She became disoriented. And when she came to the talk, to the seminar, she told me this story. And when she arrived there, the lady in charge of the seminar, she came along with 7 or 8 other people, you see. In the center's van, which goes to the bus stop to pick people up. So a group came and she was one of them. And she had no reservation. She had no idea how she came there. She was disoriented to that extent. She didn't know how she happened to come here. So her story was this. She happened to come to America, and in Los Angeles. Then at Los Angeles, she couldn't sleep, so she started walking about. And when she was thoroughly tired and hungry, she sat on a bench near the bus stop. And then 7 or 8 other people came there. And then a bus came. And the 7 or 8 people, assuming that this person, her name, I think, was April. She took April along. She hustled her. They hustled her into the bus, you see. And she went in. She sat down. She didn't have any money. So when she had to buy a bus or a ticket, she had no money. So someone next to her assumed that she had lost the money. So she provided the money and she got the ticket. Then, at Joshua Tree, they got out and they hustled her out of the bus. Yes. And then the van from the center came. She got into the van. And he said, there I am. She was really totally disoriented. So then the kindly lady in charge of the seminar, not seminar, the charge of the center, made an arrangement with her that she could attend the talks and stay there, and in return she would help the center with certain work in the kitchen or wherever. Then the first time I had a talk with her, at that I used to have a talk with each of the participants. This was her story. So I said, well, now that you're here, attend the talks and we'll see what happens. And while she was talking to me, she was weeping all the time. And her refrain, she said it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I had a perfectly wonderful husband and a wonderful family. I left them to join the ashram. Why? I don't know. And then all this, I did everything I was asked to. I didn't do one thing which I was not supposed to. why am I in this condition? Why me? That was her reply. Why me? I've done everything I asked to do. And she was weeping all the time. And my wife, who was in the next room, she found the case very pathetic, and it would be. Then the next day, the talk started. And the first day, she was flat on her stomach, with her head on her hands, weeping away, hardly listening. Then the next day, her head came up. She started listening. Then she gradually sat up and began to listen with more interest. Very soon, she started asking questions, intelligent questions, because for 12 years, she had done some intense work, miserable work, but intense work. So she had a certain understanding, and her questions were intelligent questions, which the others appreciated. To make the story a short one, by the end of the seminar, her questions ceased, and she was grinning and laughing all the time, and kept muttering, "This is so simple, this is so simple." You see? And the others who had seen the whole thing from day one couldn't believe it. So finally, when people left, they also had a talk with me. So this lady came to my room and we were talking, and she was grinning and laughing all the time, repeating her understanding. What the understanding was, very clear, nonetheless conceptual, but it was very clear. And my wife, who had seen her the first day and the last day, when she left, my wife says, "If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have believed it." The transformation was so deep. And the whole basis of it is, how can the ego himself or herself come to the conclusion that he or she doesn't exist as a doer? The ego exists because the ego thinks he or she does whatever action happens through the body. That is the basis of the ego, the sense of personal doership. The sense of personal doership is the essence of the ego. Therefore, again, when someone uses the word ego, I ask them, what do you mean by the ego? And many people do not have a very clear idea of what the ego is. They say ego is identification with the body. That is the ego. So I said, whether it was Jesus Christ or Ramana Maharshi, when they lived, after the self-realization, Ramana Maharshi lived for 50 years after the self-realization. If somebody called them by name, they would respond. And what can I do for you? And would talk. So the fact that Jesus or Ramana responded to his name being called obviously meant that there was identification with a name and form. So mere identification with a name and form cannot be the ego. So, according to my definition, the ego means identification with a name and form as the individual doer of actions. So the personal doership, that is the essence of the ego. When that essential...
I just wanted to have translated that. Didn't get it.
I'm sorry?
I didn't get it. I beg for the translation.
I could sit next to him.
Please.
Can
Yes, of course.
Komm zu dir. Oder soll ich?
Ich dachte, wir können...
Ja, wenn mehr sind, tue ich ja. Okay.
That means the difference
Yeah,
between the essence of the ego.
Yes.
That's what you want to know.
Yes.
Yes, sure.
Okay. I'm lost right now, absolutely lost.
Shall I repeat?
I'm total, yes please.
Let me repeat.
Yes please.
Whether it was Jesus or Ramana Maharshi,
Yeah.
if we were called by name,
I got it now.
they would respond.
Ja. Jesus oder Krishnamurti oder wer immer weise war, würde sich umdrehen, wenn er seinen Namen von hinten hört. Reagieren drauf.
So the fact that they responded to the name being called, the name which is attached to a particular body, form,
Der Name, der diesem Körper gehört hat, darauf haben sie reagiert.
meant that there was identification.
Bedeutet, dass der Mensch
With a
damit
name and
identifiziert, mit Form und Name identifiziert war.
So, for 50 years, Ramana Maharshi lived after self-realization.
50 Jahre nach der Selbstfindung hat der Ramana Maharshi gelebt.
And no body-mind organism can live for 50 years without identification with a name and form.
Und das geht nicht, wenn man ganz raus ist aus dem Körper.
And yet, self-realization means
Und trotzdem bedeutet die
the total
Selbsterkenntnis
annihilation of the ego,
die totale
by definition.
Auslöschung des eigenen Egos, bedeutet Selbstrealisierung.
So, if the total annihilation of the ego has happened,
Wenn das passiert ist, diese
and
totale,
still there is identification with a name and
und
form,
trotzdem noch diese Identifikation kommt, wenn man gerufen wird mit seinem Namen,
then the identification with the name and form is not the ego.
dann ist diese Identifikation mit dem Namen und der Form eben nicht das Ego.
Therefore, the ego must be something other than the mere identification with the name and form.
Deshalb muss das Ich was anderes sein als die bloße Identifikation mit Form und Name.
And that something other
Und dieses
than the
andere
mere identification with the name and form is a sense of personal doership.
ist der Sinn der persönlichen Täterschaft, des persönlichen Tuns.
I do things. These are my actions. I am responsible for my actions.
Für meine Handlungen bin ich verantwortlich.
I am in control of my life.
Ich kontrolliere mein Leben.
I am the doer.
Ich bin der Handelnde.
That is to me
Das für
the
mich
essence of the ego, the
ist die
sense
Essenz
of
des
personal
Egos,
doership.
das Wesen des Egos.
So when self-realization or enlightenment happens,
Wenn es aber eingetreten ist, diese
what
Erleuchtung,
gets annihilated
was weggebracht wird,
is the sense of personal doership, not mere identification with the
ist
name and
nur
form.
der Sinn des persönlich Handelnden, der geht weg.
You see what I mean?
Verstehst du?
The last sentence I didn't got, but continue. I got more as also ich habe mehr verstanden
Ja, okay.
als vorhin und das wollte ich.
Okay, he's satisfied now. He got what he wanted.
This is what you want.
He
Fine.
says now, we can talk to.
So now, the question really arises.
Jetzt kommt die Frage.
Basically, now probably we don't need to.
Okay.
You see, basically the question arises. The ego, which is the sense of personal doership, has to be annihilated for the final understanding or enlightenment or self-realization or whatever you call it to happen. So seeking is part of doing. So if there is a seeker who says, I am a seeker, there is doing. So the seeking begins with an individual seeker seeking enlightenment as an object which will give him or her more happiness than the world has ever given anybody. And enlightenment or self-realization happens when there is the realization that there never was an individual ego, that there never was an individual seeker, that there never was an individual self to be self-realized. You see? It begins, seeking begins with a seeker seeking enlightenment as an object of happiness, and can only end with the realization, total realization, that there never can be a seeker or a doer. Only that means the end of the ego. So what I'm coming to is, it can only happen. Your name is?
My name is Herbert.
Robert?
Herbert.
Herbert. So Herbert, what I'm coming to is this. The ego can never achieve this final understanding. The ego can only be brought to that understanding by personal experience. And that can only happen according to my second concept, which refers to life as we know it. So my second concept, first concept, let me repeat, is the source is all there is, from which has appeared this manifestation and its functioning, which is life as we call it. And in life as we call it, my basic concept is that it is not the individual computerized human body which produces anything. But nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. And when I mean God, remember, I mean the source or consciousness, not an entity connected with manifestation. Nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. And if what happens is also what you willed as an individual, it simply means that what you willed coincided with God's will. If what you willed did not coincide with God's will, it didn't happen. That is what you find from personal experience. You see? So, this fact that nothing happens unless it is God's will, and God's will works through the mechanism of the unique programming in each human being. How does God's will work? God's will works through the unique programming in each individual human being. Unique. There are no two human beings exactly alike. So what is this unique programming I'm talking about? The unique programming is this. You had no choice in being born to particular parents. Therefore, you had no choice about the unique DNA in this human object. For the same reason, you had no choice about being born in a particular environment. In Germany?
Bist du in Deutschland geboren? Okay.
Anyway, wherever you are born.
I've been born in Austria.
All
Okay.
right? So, you had no choice in being born to particular parents in Austria.
Keine Wahl gehabt.
He's saying that I had
No
no
choice.
So it was vorgestimmt.
Ja, immer. Yes, predestined.
So, this unique DNA and this environmental conditioning which you have been receiving from day one. Conditioning at home, conditioning in school, conditioning in society, conditioning in church or temple, conditioning all the time in that particular environment. So the unique DNA plus this unique environmental conditioning together is what I call the programming in this programmed object, human object. You see? So, how does God's will work? How does God's will work? Through the mechanism of this unique programming. Exactly as you use your computer, Herbert. How do you use your personal computer? You put in an input. And what can the computer do but bring out an output strictly the way it is programmed? Isn't that right? How do you work your own personal computer? You put in an input. And the computer had no choice but to bring out an output strictly the way it is programmed. Only thing is, that your computer does not have an ego who says that output is my output. But the human computer has an ego. So he says, this is my action. So how does that action happen? How does God's will bring about that action? As I say, exactly the way. That is, God or the source or consciousness or whatever you call puts in an input into this human computer. What is the input? The input is a thought comes to you. A thought.
Danke.
You have no control over what thought is going to come next. That thought may be a new thought or some thought from the memory. That makes no difference. And what thought is going to come next is not in your control. Similarly, what will be seen next or heard next or any of the senses, what will be seen next or heard next or smelt next or tasted next or touched next, not in your control. That is the input. A thought, something seen or heard, is the input. The brain reacts to that input strictly according to the programming and brings out an output. That's all it happens. And that output is an action. And the totality of these outputs, the totality of these actions through every one of the billions of human computers at any moment is what is happened at that moment in the whole world. Life as we know it is the totality of actions, totality of outputs brought about by God or consciousness as the source through every one of the billions of human computers, and the totality of that is what is at this moment. But the individual human being says it is my action. Whereas, according to my concept, I repeat, according to my concept, it is an output over which the individual had no control. Let me give you an example. 3 people see the same thing. They see the same thing. Or thought arises about something they had seen earlier. That doesn't matter. So, something is seen. 3 different people. So, the brain reacts to what is seen. In the case of one, anger arises. What is seen brings about anger. In another case, it brings about fear. You see? In the third case, it may bring about compassion. So in the case of anger, is the arising of the anger or fear or compassion is the natural reaction of the brain to an input over which it has no control, according to the programming over which it has no control. Therefore, the arising of the anger or compassion or fear is not the ego's action. It is a natural reaction of the brain to an input over which it had no control. let me put it also. Now, if these three body-mind organisms were the body-mind organisms of three sages, same thing would happen. So, at this point of time, at this point of action, anger, fear or compassion, the same reactions would happen in three body-mind organisms with three different kinds of programming, whether or not enlightenment had happened. You see what I'm getting at? Up to now, it's a natural reaction of the brain to something over which nobody had any control. So whether they were the body-mind organisms of ordinary people or they were the body-mind organisms of sages makes no difference. Anger arises or fear arises or compassion arises depending on the programming. You see? The ego comes in after this. How? The man who feels anger arises. He says, the ego comes in and says, what I've seen is terrible. I go to Bombay for a vacation and what do I see? Beggars surrounding the car every time I stop at the traffic signal. Anger arises. You see? So this, I am angry because I don't like what I have seen, is the complication of the ego, involvement of the ego. In the case of a sage, anger may arise, but not that someone should do something about anger arises. And what is more, the anger having arisen may give place to compassion. But there is no individual ego to say, I am angry. Or, I am afraid. Fear may arise. If the programming is such, if the programming makes that body-mind organism timid, fear may arise. So the arising of the fear has nothing to do whether the body-mind organism is that of an ordinary person or a sage. The difference comes later. The ordinary person says, I was afraid. My friend was not afraid. I shouldn't be afraid. I must be brave. I must go to a therapist. That is the involvement of the ego. Not wanting, not accepting what has happened. Where does the involvement of the ego come? Not accepting what has arisen. But fear arises. The sage says, all right, this body-mind organism is bound to be timid. So fear will arise. And fear may take any action. Fear may make me run away. All right, the body-mind organism runs away. I am not running away. Running away has happened. So the involvement of the ego happens when the ego reacts to the natural reaction. The natural reaction is according to the programming. If there is no ego to react, then the matter ends there. Anger arises, takes its course. Now, anger arises, and it may be that in the case of a sage, the anger makes that body-mind strike the other person. And having struck the other person, police may come and take him to jail. You see? So if it is the body-mind organism of the sage accepts that it was the will of God that the anger should make him strike somebody, and it is the will of God that he should be in jail at that moment. You see? But if it happens to an ordinary person, you see, why did I have to interfere? Let the beggar be there. Now because I interfered, I am in jail, and therefore I am missing a most important appointment which would have got me $500,000. All that is the involvement of the ego, which is a subsequent reaction to the natural reaction. That is the only difference. The original reaction according to the programming. Subsequent reaction is that of the ego. You see? So the ego is not there. Then the natural reaction remains, takes its course. I'll give you an example of what happened at one of the meetings of my guru, Nisargadatty Maharadje. He was a short-tempered person. That is, his body-mind organism had a short fuse. He would get, anger would arise very quickly. So once, someone asked a question, and anger arose. So Maharaj said, "You have been coming here for 6 years, and you ask a stupid question like that?" Anger arose. You see? Then the same man he knew Maharaj. So he gave a funny answer. And Maharaj's laughter was the loudest. One moment, anger. The second moment, amusement and laughter. What would have happened in the case of an ordinary person? He would have said, anger would arise, and then the anger would say, the individual, I am angry, that will remain. So that I am angry involvement would make him say, that man made me angry, therefore I shall not laugh at that man's humor. I shall not laugh. That didn't happen. One moment anger, next moment laughter. You see? Yes. I think you will have to have a...
You said, all right, you said that the natural course of action, something happens and it's the natural course of action till the ego interferes.
Yes.
And then there is another course of action that the ego instigates that.
Yes. The ego reacts to the consequences of the natural reaction.
Right. According to what you said, that we are programmed,
Yes.
just for clarification, isn't that reaction of the ego a natural course as well, because it is programmed
Yes.
to react in that way?
Yes.
Or not?
Sure. That also. The ego also reacts according to the way it is programmed. But the programming there gets altered with the understanding. That is why I kept saying, whatever I say is a concept. So what happens to the concept? What concept is conditioning? So conditioning is happening all the time. What do you think is happening now? Your name is?
Spiros.
Spiro. So Spiros, what is happening now is conditioning. Make no mistake. You are not listening to the truth. You are listening to concepts. And listening to concepts is conditioning. But what this conditioning may do, is that the latest conditioning can alter your existing conditioning. Alter, amend, change, transform. So what this latest conditioning does to your existing conditioning is again God's will. So if God's will is that what you listen to this brings about a transformation, transformation will happen. And for transformation to happen, certain receptivity has to be there. So if receptivity is part of the programming of this body-mind organism, then what you have listened to today, that conditioning can transform the existing conditioning. But if God's will in respect of each individual body-mind organism is what I call the destiny of that body-mind organism. Let me repeat. God's will in respect of each body-mind organism through which God's will acts is the destiny of that body-mind organism. Again, my concept. So my concept about destiny is this. At the moment of conception, God's will is stamped on that conception as the destiny of that conception. So if the destiny of a conception is not to be born at all, if it is God's will that that conception should not be born at all, that conception will be aborted. There won't be a birth. But if it is the destiny of that conception to be born and to live for a particular span of life, what happens to that born object during that span of life, every moment, is God's will and the destiny of that born object.
The transformation of the understanding you refer to,
Yes.
that is programmed as well then.
That is destined.
Is that different from programmed?
Yes. Programming is part of the body-mind organism. What happens to that programmed body-mind organism during its lifespan is God's will and what I call the destiny. I mean, basically, all it means is your programming is God's will. Destiny is also God's will. So if you want to combine the two and say it's God's will, fine, no problem.
So for the transformation and the understanding,
Yes.
again, there is nothing that the ego or we or the ego and I or whatever that is there can or cannot do.
That's the whole point. That is exactly what I'm coming to.
Very annoying, isn't it?
Annoying for whom? For the one who has no control. You know, someone showed me a cartoon the other day. The cartoon showed two puppets talking. And one puppet says, "Do you really think there is a hand up there manipulating?"
Thank you.
No problem. Yes, so we were at whatever happens, happens according to God's will. And God's will in respect of each body-mind organism is the destiny of that body-mind organism. So on this basis, until last year, we had a body-mind organism called Mother Teresa. The programming in which was such that only good deeds happen. So, the happening of the good deeds according to the programming was the destiny of that body-mind organism called Mother Teresa. And the happening of those actions, along with the consequences, was the destiny of that body-mind organism. So good deeds happened, happening of the good deeds was the destiny of that body-mind organism called Mother Teresa. And the consequences, Nobel Prize, awards, rewards, all that was also the destiny of that body-mind organism. On the other hand, you have a body-mind organism generally called a psychopathic organism. The programming in which, over which nobody had any control, no one had any control, was to produce what the society and the law called evil actions. So the happening of the evil actions was the destiny of that body-mind organism. And the consequences, being executed or thrown in jail or an institution, was also the destiny of that body-mind organism. But the basic point is, both the body-mind organisms, Mother Teresa and the psychology were created by the same source. So, at this point, the question then arises, with the mind intellect, which is the same as the ego. The mind intellect says, on what basis does God decide the destiny of each body, mind, organism? What is the basis? And that the human being can never have the answer to. Why? Because the human being essentially, basically, is only a created object. And a created object can never possibly know the will of the creator subject. If you do a painting, a modern painting, and put a figure in it, with one eye here, another eye there, and that kind of a thing, then the figure could ask you, why have you made me so grotesque? Why have you made this stupid painting at all, which is worth $1 million, maybe? So a created object, the figure in your painting, can never know why you painted the picture at all. So a created object can never know the will of the creator subject. That is why the German mystic, Meister Eckhart, said so pointedly, all that the human being can do is to wonder and marvel at the magnificence of God's creation. He cannot even try to understand it. Meaning, God's creation is a mystery, and the created object, the human being, can only accept it as a mystery and not try to solve it.
I have a question, Ramesh. When you talked about this picture which is drawn by the artist himself might not know why he draw a figure with 3 eyes.
Sure, I agree.
So I want to know, well, you might not know, but God, when you talk of God's will, is there an intention behind God's will?
Should be high.
An intention, I mean...
And who says this? A created object. A created object says how the creator subject should be.
No.
Yeah.
I want to know if there's only consciousness, yeah? There's
right.
Okay, and it's flowing and things happening. But you talk of God's will, and if with will I associate that there is an intention, that I want something to happen.
You see, now, that's why it's a series of concepts. The concept I have for your problem is this. The concept is that this life as we know it is a movie which is already there. It is already there. God is not created, but for us to, what we can do is watch the movie only plate by plate. So our view is restricted. God's view when He made the movie is of eternity.
So what you say is there's no answer to the one, or there are 2 ultimate questions for me. One is the why, and the other one is where from. So I will get never an answer to that 2 questions.
Who will not get an answer? Who will not get? That me is a created object. That is the point. The me forgets.
And
as soon as the me realizes.
But I can ask a question. A computer cannot ask a question. You know what I mean?
Yes, because the computer can't ask the question. Because the computer has no ego. This computer can ask because the creator created an ego. So the question really is, where did the ego come from? The ego didn't create itself. So the answer is, the ego had to be created as part of life. Because the created objects themselves the consciousness could work through those created objects and bring about whatever it wanted. But that wouldn't be life as we know it. That wouldn't be God's game. That wouldn't be Leela. What is that on which the Leela or God's game or life as we know it is based? Interhuman relationships.
And what is your concept? Well,
that is what I'm trying to explain. The concept is this. Life as we know it cannot happen unless there are interhuman relationships. That is, friendship and enmity, love and hate, war and peace. The opposites cannot happen without interhuman relationships. And interhuman relationships cannot happen unless there are egos. So ego had to be created. The source of God had to create the ego so that life as we know it can happen. And the same creator, when he created the egos, also started the process of destroying the egos in a limited number of cases.
yes.
Therefore, there is no seeker seeking enlightenment. Seeking enlightenment has been happening as part of life as we know it. Seeking began because it was God's wish, or that seeking should happen as a very small percentage of the totality of egos. So even that seeking is not your choice. And that is part of the understanding, that the ego did not choose to seek enlightenment. The seeking began because it was part of God's will. And because it was part of God's will, certain limited number of body-mind organisms were programmed in such a way that seeking spirituality or seeking enlightenment could happen. And in the majority of cases, that programming did not have this bit which started the seeking. So even seeking enlightenment, seeking answers to questions, was part of God's will.
And I'll never get an answer.
The created object will never get an answer. Yes.
You said, like, if there's an anger reaction, then the ego thinks afterwards,
Yes.
I did the wrong thing. Or,
Yes.
and if the sage has anger, then there's just anger, and then there can be laughing or...
And the anger will take its course.
Who, in the case of the sage, who is there, or who notices the anger arising? Or
The anger arises as a part of the programming in that body-mind organism. What happens later is where the sage or no sage comes in. Anger arises and takes its course. Let me give you an instance. There are two people walking along the road. They're friends. One man happens to have the understanding and may be called a sage. The other person does not have the understanding and may be called an ordinary person. They're both walking along the road and they see a woman being molested. You see. So one of them goes and rescues the woman. But in doing that, he hits the man. Therefore, being hit, policemen come and they take both the people away and put them in a jail. You see? So, if it was the sage who is in the jail, the sage will accept that the anger arose and took its own course according to the destiny of this body-mind organism. In other words, the sage will accept that at that moment it was the destiny of that body, mind, organism of a sage to be in jail. The ordinary man will get involved in what has happened, in the anger and its cause. And the ordinary man will say, I had no business interfering with something. It was the policeman who should have taken care of the woman. Why did I interfere? Now here I am in jail and have missed a business appointment, which could have gotten me a big profit. That is the involvement of the ordinary person. The sage sits there and says, we'll see what happens. You see, there's a story about this. A rabbi used to go every morning on his rounds, meets the people, do whatever he can for them, come back home. A policeman close by used to see this. So being a policeman, he kept, where is he going? What is he doing? Is he cheating somebody? Goes regularly out. So one day he called the rabbi and he said, Rabbi, where are you going? And the rabbi says, I don't know. And the policeman got angry. And he put him in jail. But at least for a couple of hours. That I suppose the policeman had the right. So he put him in jail. You see? And after 2 hours, because there was nothing against him, he let him go. So, while leaving the jail, the rabbi says, you see, I didn't know. I didn't know you were going to question me and put me in jail. But that was accepted.
Who is it who's doing the accepting?
The acceptance happens or it doesn't happen. The acceptance really is the understanding. The understanding in action is acceptance of whatever the situation. If there is no understanding, then there is no acceptance and there is involvement. I shouldn't have done this. I am in jail now for something I need not have done. That is the involvement.
Ramesh, at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that it's important to know, to know what you want.
Yes.
Yes. I saw you 18 months ago, and much has happened from the understanding of the teachings. And there is confusion and grief because more and more and more I just don't know. There are huge gaps in the knowing. And it freaks me out some of the time. And some of the time it's a great relief.
So,
I don't know.
So what does a seeker want? Self-realization. Let's use the word self-realization. You see? But the seeking begins, as I keep saying, wanting self-realization as an object which would give him pleasure, more happiness. But the real self-realization can only happen if it is the will of God and the destiny of that body, mind, organism. And self-realization means the realization that there is no self as an individual to acquire self-realization. You see? And when does this understanding happen? That there never has been a self. Only when there is no world. You see? And when is there no world? So that there is no small self, individual self. In deep sleep. In deep sleep, there is no world. There is no individual self. So, in deep sleep, there is self-realization. You could say that there is self-realization. But that self-realization doesn't last. Because when you wake up, the world is there, the me is there, the involvement is there. You see? So, the real question is, how can self-realization happen even in the waking state when the world is there? Isn't it? So the real question is, how can self-realization happen even in the waking state, when the world is there and therefore the me is there? That is the real question. So who the me who says the self is there is the ego. So the basis of self-realization throughout, including the waking state, is the prevailing of that which exists in deep sleep. If that which exists in deep sleep and creates self-realization happens also in the waking state, then the same self-realization will happen in the waking state. So what is the condition in deep sleep which brings about this self-realization? That condition is that there is no me, an individual doer. That is, the ego is not present in deep sleep. Ego as the doer, the individual doer, is not present in deep sleep. Therefore, there is, you may call it self-realization, you may call it peace, which is the result of self-realization. Peace, calm, there is peace. So for that peace to prevail in the waking state, the same condition must apply. And that is no existence of the ego. So, if in the waking state there is total understanding and acceptance that there is no individual doer, everything happens because it is God's will, through the source or consciousness functioning through every body-mind organism and bringing out such actions as are supposed to happen according to the will of God or the destiny of that body-mind organism, then the same condition will prevail, which means the ego has been annihilated. I repeat, for that peace which prevailed in deep sleep to prevail in the waking state, the same condition must prevail, and that is no sense of personal doership. And that no sense of personal doership can prevail if, from your personal experience, you are able to come to the firm, unconditional acceptance that no action can really be yours. So how can that happen? That can happen if at the end of the day you are able to take some time off, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, sit back quietly, think of any action that has happened during the day, investigate it, find out, was that really my action? Or did something lead to something, and it happened? And I dare say, each time your investigation will lead you to the undoubted conclusion, even a simple thing, that it was truly not my action, because I had no control over it at any stage. Therefore, how can I call it my action? You take another action. And at the end of the day, if you come to the conclusion that no action that day was your action, and if day after day you come to the same conclusion, then if no action is my action, then who is this me? Which is the self-inquiry of Ramana Maharshi. Who am I? But who am I as an intellectual query doesn't produce anything. So only when the inquiry arises from the very depths of your being, because your personal experience has proved to you, no action is my action. No action is my action. Then the question, the query, who am I? Who is this me? Is there a me at all? Does not come from the intellect, but it comes from the heart, from the very depths of your being. And the depths of your being is the source. So the question, who am I? Is there a me at all? Doesn't any longer become an intellectual query, but something from your depths of your being. The query finally arises from the soul, from the source. And it can only be from the source that the answer comes if it is God's will and the destiny of that body, mind, organism. And the source, if it is the destiny of that body, seeing the suffering which the ego has suffered, gets the answer. My dear child, there never was a me to suffer. There never was a me to do anything. And if there is no me to do anything, how can the me commit a sin? Why have you been carrying a load of guilt? No action was your action. How could you have committed a sin? How could you have hurt anybody? So the total final acceptance, because of this personal investigation, comes to the conclusion that no action is my action. Then what happens? An action happens which the society approves and praises you. So the praise of the society becomes an input. Whether the sage is an ordinary person, the input, which is the praise from society, the brain reacts to it, and a sense of pleasure arises naturally. A sense of pleasure will arise. But knowing that it is not your action, what will not arise? What will not arise is a sense of pride. Pride belongs to the ego. So a sense of pleasure may arise, but not pride. Supposing the action has hurt somebody, and the society says that was a bad action, then a sense of regret may arise as a result of the brain reacting to the reaction of the society. A sense of regret or displeasure may arise. But what will not arise, knowing that it was not your action? A sense of guilt cannot arise. It is not your action. You see? So in the case of actions happening through your own body, mind, organism, pleasure or displeasure may arise, but not pride or guilt. But knowing that no action happens through this body, mind, organism, which you call yours, nothing happens through any other body, mind, organism either. So if an action happens through some other body, mind, organism, which hurts you, or this body, mind, organism, hurt will arise, of course, physical or mental. Hurt will arise as a natural reaction of the brain to an event. Hurt will arise, but not hate. No one has done anything. No one is capable of hurting you. No one is capable of doing anything. You see? So, hurt may arise, but not hate. So, the total acceptance that no action is my action, and therefore no action is anyone else's action, brings about what? No pride, no guilt, no hate, no envy. Isn't that really what you are looking for in life? And calling it enlightenment or self-realization? That's why it's so simple. All that is to be understood is that no one does anything. Everything happens because it is God's will. And that understanding can happen only if it is God's will. And the destiny of that body, mind, organism. So, let the seeking which began with God's will take its own course. Why are you concerned in the meantime? Enjoy life as it happens. Yes.
Is this state of enlightenment or self-realization, is this a development to this, or is it just one point where something changes? Development means that it goes step by step, and I know how it is, then I can go out and I come in.
If you mean, is this a process? Yes, of course it's a process. But how long will that process last? will depend on God's will and the destiny of that body-mind organism. You see? But it is a process.
Because of some saints are explaining it, if it would be just one point, if they have one point of enlightenment and then they had it from this moment on.
So that point of enlightenment, according to what I've just said, will be that point when the answer comes from the source. My dear child, there never was a me to suffer. That is the point of enlightenment. That there never has been a me to do any action, either me or someone else. So if there is no me to do any action, no pride, no guilt, and there is no one else to do any action to hurt me, no hate, no envy. You see? Which means peace, even in the waking state. Yes. Shall we make that the last question for this morning, please?
My background is I'm a Buddhist priest, and I've been reading your work for the last few years. And although I do know that there is no doer of the action, in the inquiry as it moves into what you're calling that place of the heart, would it make sense to act as if you were totally responsible for your own actions, yet you cannot control the result? Because if not, then what the Buddha taught regarding the purification of what he called the mind really makes no sense. What he referred to in that context was such things as being aware of what you're doing, being mindful of others' feelings,
yes,
acting out of that self-spontaneously generating compassion, etc.
Quite correct.
Yeah. So what is the importance of being responsible for your own actions when you see that you have absolutely no control over the results whatsoever?
Therefore, your being responsible itself is a misconception. You are either a responsible person or you are not a responsible person. So if you are a responsible person, you are programmed to do responsible actions. Someone else may be programmed, who cares? I can't be bothered. No sense of responsibility. So even that sense of responsibility is part of the programming.
That really does make sense. I mean, but at the same time, the function of what we call sometimes, or people call practicing, doing whatever practices, said to be means to open the heart, said to be various means to clear seeing, or all those different things. That's also part of the programming, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, but there may be a way that I resist the programming.
Oh, you see, that is exactly what happens. The individual, the ego, resists the programming and becomes unhappy. That is all that happens. The ego does not accept the programming and becomes unhappy. You see, I ran away. I shouldn't have run away. I should have stood there and fought like my friend did. My friend is a brave man, I am a timid man. Unhappiness. You see? But if the understanding is, my friend did what he was supposed to do and I did what I was supposed to do, no unhappiness. You see?
Yes.
That is the acceptance. Right. Acceptance of the programming and acceptance of the destiny. Well, let's call it a day for this morning. We'll continue tomorrow morning. Of course, this evening there'll be other talk. It's rather interesting. You see, it is the result of a research made by the reputed London School of Economics. Not some riff-raff organization, not like some riff-raff advaita organization. It was done by the London School of Economics, which is as practical as you can imagine. I say that because I came from that school. Well, this is interesting. The title of this brief article is this: The Bangladeshis are world's happiest people. Bangladeshis are the world's happiest people, and they are one of the world's poorest people. So let me read this. You see, London, December 9. Would you believe it? Bangladesh is the happiest nation in the world. The United States, on the other hand, is a sad story. It ranks only 46th in the world. Happiness survey, that's way behind India, 5th happiest place in the world. And others, including Ghana and Latvia, Croatia and Estonia, they are the backward places. Research led by London School of Economics professors into the link between personal spending power and the perceived quality of life has conclusively proved that money can buy everything but happiness. The study revealed that people in Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world, derive far more happiness from their small income than, for example, the British, 32nd on the list, do from their relatively large bank balances. In fact, people in most rich countries, including Austria, Netherlands, Switzerland, Canada, Japan, and others, I don't know why they omitted Germany, are much more unhappy than their poorer counterparts in countries like the Dominican Republic and Armenia. Most unfortunate, however, are Russians and people in some other parts of the former Soviet Union. They are neither rich nor happy. Indicates the World's Happiness Survey. Slovenia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Bulgaria, and Moldova follow the United States in the list to bring up the rear. The study shows that although the British have twice as much money to spend in real terms compared with 40 years ago, their perceived quality of life, that is the happiness, has not improved. Earlier surveys revealed that many Britons thought money could bring happiness. The new study shows that such a link still exists in poor countries because a small increase in income can mean large improvements in lifestyle. So the money does mean, but up to a level. At a starving level, you do need money. But once beyond a certain line, money doesn't mean that much. So he says, beyond a certain income level, that direct relationship breaks down. According to the research, happiness in rich countries now is far more dependent on close personal relationships, good health, and job satisfaction. I would say that's why there's psychological workers, the psychotherapists, do so well. Because the unhappiness is really based on misconception. So that's what it is. I thought you'd be interested.